Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for answering back. It's Black History Month. We speak to each other. All right. Because call and response means that when I say hello, you say hello. That means that I see you and you see me, which is more than, anyway. So I do want to start off by saying, and I'm going to go through a list of thank yous, but before I thank anyone that is living, we all must thank those who have passed on, especially recently, and our ancestors. And because if it wasn't for our ancestors, then we would not be here. And we are standing on their shoulders because of the work and the efforts that they did. So I always start like that. I also want to acknowledge that these lands were not the lands of pilgrims, they were lands of indigenous peoples. And so I also say Osiyo, which is Cherokee for hello, and I am Eastern Band Cherokee, and I'm still Black. Crazy, isn't it? That's North Carolina, y'all, for those who don't know. So I do want to thank, I have such an amazing program manager who helps me with these points. That's when you know you're important, when the point, you know what I'm saying. Okay, so I want to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for their belief in us and their faith in us, because they have provided an exceptional amount of funding for the last 3 years, which we extended to 4. But I believe that we're going to keep going for many, many generations, and we are going to acknowledge and celebrate a specific ancestor tonight, and that is W.E.B. Du Bois. So I'm very thankful to the Mellon Foundation. I want to thank many of the Du Bois Center donors. Many of you are in this room right now. I want to thank you, because whatever you give, and I'm not running for president, but whatever you give helps all the things that we do. I'm sorry, I'm just so tired of like all the people on the stage, and it's a lot going on. I want to thank Simon Neem, who is the Dean of Libraries, who is sick, so he can't be here with us today, but he's here in spirit. Provost John McCarthy, who's also not here, but I just want to acknowledge the former Provost John Staros, who helped me get tenure. Hello, thank you. All right. I always say that, he always says, no, you earned tenure. I didn't give you tenure. So Carol Kinnair and communications in the library, because without that, we would not be communicating with anyone, I think. And so all of her efforts are very, very appreciated. I want to thank Kim Phil, Lauren Weiss, Leslie Shaler, who helped us with our promotional materials, but Kim and Lauren, who helps make everything move smoothly, and they are the ones who greeted you downstairs. And I want to thank Rosalie Kinsey, who is our current undergraduate student doer of everything. She does so much for us, including doing the closed captions for all of the talks of the scholars that will be available soon on our website, because we want everyone to have access to those talks, including you all here. Jeremy Smith and Josh Silver for filming the event and live streaming, so we're live, hey. Ben Barnhart, our photographer extraordinaire, hey, okay. Kelsey Murray and all the team at the events sales office, UMass Catering, we always have to thank them, thank you. Which includes the bar. Chris Oakley, manager of the Old Chapel, and special thanks for hosting and helping prepare for this event. So I really, really want to say that, and I'm going to talk about highlights, our 10 years, because we started in 2009, and we have a lot of people in the audience that I want to thank, and not just thank, but just acknowledge and talk about, but I'll do that after our wonderful speaker shares with us her wisdom, and you're not going to eat till she speaks. Because you know how that goes. Okay, so I want to introduce Saida Grundy, Dr. Saida Grundy. She is a feminist sociologist of race and ethnicity and Assistant Professor of Sociology, African American Studies, and Women's and Gender Studies at Boston University. It's a pregnant pause. That's a lot. Her research to date has focused upon, this is going to be a loud table, I'm sorry. Her research to date has focused on formations and ideologies of gender and racialization within the Black middle class, specifically men. Using in-depth interviews, her current work examines graduates of Morehouse College, the nation's only historically Black college for men. Quite simply, this work asks how, in light of an ongoing national climate and discourse about young Black men, quote unquote, in crisis, the men of Morehouse experience as the solution, I get excited. The men of Morehouse experience racialization and the process of making manhood at an institution that frames Black male elites as the solution to the crisis and the rightful representatives of the racial agendas. Her current book, Manhood Within the Margins, Promise, Peril, and Paradox at the Historically Black College for Men, is forthcoming with University of California Press and expands upon this work. Let's clap. You knew I was going to do that. Saida's research interests currently span examinations of masculinity and, quote, social justice capitalism, racialized rape culture, and bridging hegemonic masculinity theories to our understanding of campus sexual assault. Her work has been supported by the Boston University Center for the Humanities, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. I want us all to give a warm DuBois Center welcome to Dr. Saida Grundy.
It's really fantastic to be here. We are in a good mood. I'm so glad. I feel like we should be playing some like Teddy Pendergrass right now. We're in a real good mood. Thank you all for having me here. When my father heard that I had been invited here, he does what helicopter parents do when he goes and looked up, what is this program, who are the past speakers. He said, do you know who's spoken at this thing? He said, it's D.L. Lewis. Evelyn Higginbotham, it's Herb and Bettina Epthecker, it's Alden Morris. He said, these are really big names. Why would they ask you? so, with that vote of confidence from my own parents, I want to say that it is really my pleasure to be here today. Thank you to my host, to Adam, for making everything so perfectly seamless logistically. To Whitney, thank you so much, my dear. And I even got a really wonderful note from Chancellor Subaswamy, who's a family friend from back in Kentucky. He's always been a sweetheart. It's not to say anything's wrong with Bob Brown, but if you do get a little FOMO over you all, chancellors and administrators. But I really say that it's an honor, and not just as a compulsory salutation, but these types of invitations are rarely extended to junior scholars. And so I think it says quite a bit about the intellectual community here at UMass that you believe that ideas and forward-thinking insights into Du Bois's legacy can come from all ranks and scholarly orientations. It may come as a surprise to you that there are some in our field who object to the neglect of our profession's conventions, even as a healthy skepticism of the discipline and profession are entirely within a Du Boisian frame of thought. In my field of sociology, we are in a moment where more than a few are uneasy with the shift we are undertaking in the canon to an inclusion of Du Bois. Such a reformation of the canon has happened before, when, with the radical insistence of the 1960s, sociologists shifted from a canon of Kant, Zimmel, Durkheim, and Weber to Marx, Durkheim, and Weber. we are here now at a ripe and prurient moment, both intellectually and politically, as we rightfully center Du Bois among these pillars of thought. This installment should be understood as far more than additive for a Du Boisian reformation of sociology and the recognition of Du Bois as the progenitor of American sociology, as Alden Morris and Earl Wright have claimed, requires an attendant acknowledgement that the discipline of sociology was expressly intended for the study of race and the color line when the Atlanta School gave birth to it. Thank you. To do Du Boisian sociology, then, is to refuse the reductive model of race as a variable in the dynamics and problems where social scientists pick and choose where to consider race. For Du Bois, the color line was far than a demarcation of difference, but rather race was a way of seeing, and racialization was a process that at all times organized life for those on either side of the color line, and even within the color line itself. One of the scholarly fingerprints in my research trajectory has been a near preoccupation with origin stories of people, of institutions, and of scholarly disciplines. Because the origin stories we choose to recognize are the narratives that frame our intentions. That the origin of sociology was wrongly attributed to the Chicago School, and that this false narrative lasted for a century without mainstream sociology acknowledging multiple efforts to correct it, tells us a great deal, not only about who we are, but also about the charge of Du Boisian sociology as a school of social thought that continuously corrects dominant narratives from the margins. I start with these questions of correcting and shifting the canon towards Du Bois because they remind me of my own origin story as someone who came to Du Bois through Black feminist thought and have continued to use Du Boisian sociology to Black feminist aims. The Du Bois Atlanta School was, of course, established at the Atlanta University, what was then a historically Black graduate school founded for the continued educations of graduates from Spelman and Morehouse Colleges, two premier single-sex HBCUs that still border the original AU campus. I am a Spelman graduate, and my training there incubated me in the canon of foremothers of Black feminist intellectualism with a particular curricular emphasis on the works of Anna Julia Cooper, who was bar none the leading voice and most sophisticated thinker in Black feminist thought during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was Cooper's radical vision of social justice and education that challenged an emerging status quo about racial uplift that was espoused by many of her contemporaries. In a time when Black male elites imagined racial uplift in terms of what best advanced themselves, Cooper thrust the woman question into the heart of the problem of the color line. She insisted that racial improvement projects focus attention on the conditions of working class and poor Black women by arguing that, quote, a stream cannot rise higher than its source. There are those who enter Du Bois as some successor of Douglass, a rival of Washington, or a comrade of the Niagara movement. I entered Du Bois's corpus situated within an intellectual exchange with his feminist contemporaries, chiefly Cooper. It was paramount to my Spelman professors that we understood Black feminism's claims to an intellectual history. Sojourner Truth had been rightfully celebrated, but her Ain't I a Woman broken vernacular also appealed to the paternalistic white abolitionists who continued to popularize her speech well into a time when Black women were fighting arduously to secure their voices in scholarly print. Cooper and Du Bois were not only contemporaries, but their work and activism can also be read as hinged. They exchanged 33 letters between 1923 and 1932, mostly regarding Cooper's struggles to publish her essays on race, gender, and culture in the crisis. And their intellectual relationship has been accepted as highly reciprocal. Here, however, Du Bois is also quite flawed. The letters reveal what Joy James calls his pro-feminist politics on Black women's liberation, while simultaneously barricading the intellectual contributions of the very group of women he championed. He would later run a picture of Cooper in her doctoral regalia in a 1925 issue of The Crisis. Cooper's feminist urgency in these letters reaches farther than breaking any glass ceiling in Black publishing. She prods Du Bois to imagine scholarly print as an arm of activism and race betterment. She articulates to Du Bois a vision of the crisis that would become the publication we know, one that supports Black arts and education, introduced positive Black images, and debunked racist propaganda while encouraging democratic debate on racial advancement. Black feminism effectively bent the arc of Du Bois towards the modernity that has allowed him to fare so well for a century and a half. The Black Women's Club movement, beyond doubt, earns his support and forward thinking that Black women are indispensable to racial uplift. Black feminist scholars have given consideration to Du Bois's feminist import. While his relationship with Cooper and other contemporaries make clear that he engaged with women he viewed as individually exceptional, and while he championed Black women's political liberation and their critical role as mother laborers, his framework for Black intellectualism was decidedly masculinist, as Hazel Carby notes. Individual women are his catalysts, prodding his activism and race politics into the 20th century, and Black women are, in his own words, critical to Black political empowerment. The Du Bois who tells us that the uplift of women is, next to the problem of the color line and the peace movement, our greatest modern cause, is also the Du Bois who gauged that Black women's enfranchisement would be more beneficial to Black progress than white women's votes would be to whites. And that was prophetic. But this is the same Du Bois who remains unconvinced that Black leadership and Black intellectualism were the domains of Black femininity. He readily divorced Black women's collective political utility from their capacity for intellectual contribution. And Francine Wilson explains in much greater detail about the careers of Du Bois's outstanding female pupils. We see some of them here, who outside of the war era could find little work as social scientists. If Du Boisian sociology is truly marked by this claim to change the dominant narrative from the social and disciplinary margins, then now is the time to ask ourselves, which Du Bois will we incorporate into the canon? We have full terrain to be inspired by Du Bois and improve upon him. I want to make the case today that it's a fully feminist stripe of Du Boisian scholarship that best serves our future. Not only because of a what about the women question, but because Du Bois's feminist potential is his most emancipatory and provides us the best defense against the anesthetization by those who will undoubtedly make it their work to see him safe, dead, and de-radicalized as he is moved into the disciplinary mainstream. And within his life and his works, we see a model for Du Bois, who himself is a scholar denied, working on mainstream sociology from the margins, but who is simultaneously being worked on by Black women, who he seems to eventually admit denying and marginalizing. Black and brown feminists, the likes of Angela Davis, Farah Jasmine Griffin, Hazel Carby, Valashini Kupon, Cheryl Gilkes, point out the Janus-faced nature of Du Bois's legacy, as it has been taken up for decidedly masculinist aims by many 20th century Black male intellectuals and celebrated as proto-feminist. But if we take Du Bois as a whole, and with him the Black women who influence his thinking, then Du Bois and Cooper are forerunners of yet another under-acknowledged Black intellectual tradition, where the most forward-thinking Black thought is that which is worked upon the most by Black feminists who continue to radically pull Black intellectuals writ large towards facing an obvious truth, that racial advancement cannot be staked on that which liberates half the race. This belief that Black feminist scholarship not only drives gender and sexuality into racial discourses, but that Black women's intellectual work actively works on Black men has provided myself and others with an intellectual inheritance from Cooper and Du Bois. More specifically, Cooper was determined to influence her peers, Black male elites, who she keenly understood occupied a position that set the racial agenda, most likely because they were at the forefront of the kinds of racial leadership that was validated by white male elites. This hegemony that Black male elites hold over the rest of the race has not changed in the 100 years since Cooper called out its blind spots. And it's really is Cooper's concern and Du Bois's feminist potential in responding to it that I took as the guiding intellectual spirit of my book. So, as we have learned, I just finished my book. I want to apologize to all of you authors whose books I skimmed. No one told me it was going to be this hard. I have not recovered fully from the mental taxation. I am not sure if I have early onset dementia or not. I had skipped some of your footnotes, and that was disrespectful. Those footnotes, I now realize, were a whole Wednesday. I will never skim books again. My apologies to all. So, this book of mine. To explain the argument that frames this book, sociologists have consistently produced insights into processes and dynamics of racialization. It's really one of our more fruitful areas of race theory. But most often our interest has turned towards how racialization occurs between races, right? Particularly white-dominated systems and spaces. Sociologists mostly interrogate the Du Boisian veil as a sort of boundary, right? A socializing boundary. And we look mostly at racialization in terms of how racialized subjects experience race as something that's imposed upon them by those beyond the veil who do the racializing. But I've always been more fascinated by how racialization occurs within the race. And for this, I must admit my colleagues in political science have provided our most useful insights. My opinion, sociologists will argue with me. So to explain what the theoretical frames of my book, so Michael Dawson, who we all know, right? So Michael Dawson argues, he's trying to explain why Black people vote as this consensus in our voting patterns, and he says, well, it's because we have an idea of linked fate, and basically African Americans decide, we reach a consensus about the racial agenda that's going to be the priority in the race. Kathy Cohen then follows up with a simple but cutting question, in which African Americans, which African Americans set this agenda, right? In The Boundaries of Blackness, Cohen used the HIV/AIDS crisis, which disproportionately blighted Black communities, and concluded that the race as a whole does not reach a consensus. Instead, social hierarchies within the race relegate some of us to secondary marginalization. The most vulnerable, the most economically precarious and socially stigmatized among us are often blamed for our condition, while the least disadvantaged African Americans are viewed as the victims of racism and deemed worthy of the most attention. Cohen saw the HIV/AIDS crisis as drawing on the multiple identities that African Americans hold along intersections of sexuality, class, religion, and gender, and organized those differences into within-race hierarchies that replicated and internalized the same forms of marginalization that white Americans had inflicted upon us. Du Bois postured the veil as a portal of insight for the racialized subject, and that the veil structured the world into a one-way mirror, where the subject sees out, but those outside the veil cannot see in. As a theoretical architecture, I actually think the veil is far more capacious in explaining the inner workings of Black racialization. Where Cohen picks up is where Du Bois leaves off. The veil isn't only a portal of insight for the racialized subject, but it's also constitutive, right? That it organizes Black politics and within-group hegemonies. It places those with hegemonic Blackness at the forefront of racial representation, a status that allows them to dictate what harms and injuries to others within the race are necessary casualties when managing how Black life is seen by whites. And I would say it actually dictates what is racism in terms of how Black people experience multiple intersections of oppression. What my work interrogates then is the other actor at play in Cohen's cross-cutting issue. I deploy that Cooperian feminist lens from the margins to examine the group of African Americans who have consistently set the racial agenda and who do the hyper-marginalization of others within the race. Since Reconstruction, and indeed before it, racial agendas have always been set by Black male elites who practice what I would call hegemonic blackness and authorizing themselves to organize black communities, social problems, and political priorities around who and what should be seen across the veil. And what better way to explore this masculine anxiety and the masculine anxiety of this provoking position in which black men are simultaneously hyper-aware of their own visibility while dictating everyone else's problems, how everyone else's problems will be counted as racism, than Morehouse College, the nation's only historically black college for men. I'm not sure what you all know about Morehouse, but by tonight you should know some. I titled my book Manhood Within the Margins because Morehouse is a site that truly institutionalizes the belief that black males are the most marginalized group in America, or what legal scholar Paul Butler termed black male exceptionalism, i.e. the belief that black men fare worse than any other group by any metric. And this is not to say we're not sympathetic to particular plights of particularly young black men, but it is to say that we have ignored the other factors that have affected other groups in other ways with similar rates. But manhood at Morehouse is also groomed within the margins of a narrowly constructed trope of success, respectability, and a rightful form of masculine racial leadership that obligates a representation of the race. I have a long history with Morehouse. They might say too long. But my background as a Spelman student was not isolated from Morehouse at all. I was very, very active on that campus, and I was a senior editor for the official student paper, the Morehouse, the Maroon Tiger, and in a former life, I was Miss Morehouse College. Now, I'm going to show you one picture. We're going to get through this quickly. All right? That is actually a sash, which my parents framed. But this is another life. But this is, when I was a junior, there was a very savage beating of a student named Gregory Love. He was a sophomore, and Gregory Love goes to the shower room, and he peeks over a stall, and he says, I forgot my glasses, and I was looking for my roommate, and in that stall is Aaron Love. And Aaron Price, excuse me. And Aaron Price goes into a rampage. He is yelling slurs. He goes back to his room. He gets a baseball bat. He comes back to the shower room, and he beats Gregory Love within an inch of his life. It would have been tried as Georgia's first hate crime had Greg Love come out. He did not come out in that situation, but the campus response, and I'm observing all this as a student, was one that was, for me, particularly peculiar, to say the least. They sent out a survey that asked, should gay students be separated in the dorms? To what extent should Morehouse allow homosexuality? Like, these were the questionnaires that were submitted to students. If you ask the students, they would say, well, this is just, black masculinity. And I said, no, I don't think it is. This does not ring true for me, for the men I know. This is something particularly institutionalized about this place in which you all see manhood within a particularly narrow frame. And that's what really began this quest for me over 10 years ago to tell this story. And I have really swung a feminist axe on Morehouse, as you will see. But you need to know something about Morehouse. So located in Southwest Atlanta, Morehouse enrolls nearly 3,000 undergraduates, 93% of whom are black. The college awards more black male baccalaureates than any other college or university. From its founding at the height of Reconstruction in 1867, Morehouse has been deeply involved with the social and moral project of racial advancement. Through the rhetoric of leadership and exceptionalism that is consistently articulated there, the institution promotes a belief that advancement relies on the exemplary deeds of educated men. Morehouse demonstrates its preeminent role in producing black male leadership, and its list of notable alumni include many of the most revered black men who we can think of, right? So Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr., Samuel L. Jackson, former U.S. Surgeon General David Satcher, Julian Bond, former Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson, Spike Lee, right? The list goes on and on. Our former Homeland Security Secretary Jed Johnson, right? So Morehouse lauds itself as the college of choice for black men, based mostly on the reputation of its alumni. And many African Americans regard it as setting the standard for the image of successful black men in higher education. It has a lore, I think, in black communities that is larger than its size, right? It's a small liberal arts school, but it has a cultural significance within many black communities that is much larger. So I once had a friend who grew up entirely, regular blue-collar black, and his idea of the black bourgeoisie was places that where he thought they'd be completely chill, right? Because in his mind, he said, everyone's already arrived in status, right? Like the whole point is to get to the black bourgeoisie, and then you can sort of let your hair down. But in actuality, it's spaces where black people are firmly pressed into the veil, that basically where they live lives on the front lines of the mainstream interactions with whites that are particularly anxiety-producing. And for Morehouse men, the college years aren't spent on frat houses or sloppy binge drinking, but rather college is a cultural grooming process that is inundated with messages and instructions about how to walk, how to dress, how to shake hands, how to tie a tie, who to marry, and above all things, what not to do as a Morehouse man. Their coming of age experience crystallizes what that DuBoisian double consciousness, in which the racialized subject measures oneself against the means of a nation that looked back in contempt. Actual whites don't need to be physically present in this process. And in fact, there's an entire universe of racialization that happens purely in spaces where black life is sort of relieved from the white gaze. And this is like August Wilson play levels of blackness, right? Like this is the blackness way deep in the veil. Blackity black, right? That is potato salad blackness. But I argue that it is black elites who continually prod this urgency for the rest of the race to think of their lives as being under constant surveillance from the imagined white gaze or a real white gaze that might be lurking around any corner, right? This idea of, respectability being an idea of how we are seen from the outside. The experience of being groomed within the walls of Morehouse is not in isolation from the worrisome conditions of black men as a whole, but is in essence a reaction to it, right? We know that this is factually true. We know that black men in higher ed have some really alarming numbers in terms of particularly getting black boys out of high school and into higher ed. And Morehouse, even though it boasts itself on its laurels, it actually is highly subject to what's going on with black men in terms of college preparedness. In recent years, it had a recruitment campaign to recruit Latino males, which alumni found very controversial. But it's more proof that, Morehouse is not an island. It stands in response to what's going on with black men more largely. So, So the experience of being groomed within the walls of Morehouse is not an isolation from the worrisome condition of black men on the whole, but is in essence a reaction to it. In the wake of alarming statistics about black male high school completion rates, unemployment, and college preparedness that have long been nationally discussed under the umbrella of the so-called crisis of the black male, Morehouse's national image has become emblematic of students who overcome troubling statistics about young black men. For over a generation, a national panic about this black male crisis has been drummed into black communities by black clergy, elected officials, and vocal community leaders. I framed this book essentially around how Morehouse's culture and practices institutionalize a paradoxical belief that young black men are at once the greatest detriment to the race and that Morehouse men are the solutions to a national black male problem. But there's an origin story to how this crisis came to be masculinized that has black male elites playing a key role in the story. So the decline in the labor-intensive manufacturing during the 1980s greatly reduced stable blue-collar employment for African Americans, whose unemployment rates, even in periods of growth, were consistently double those of whites. This devastating job loss in Black urban areas was compounded by that mounting war on the Black poor that was spread across Black men and women, right? And we know LBJ's war on poverty relentlessly vilified Black womanhood. The 1965 Moynihan Report's hysteria over emasculating single Black mothers who prevented Black men from becoming breadwinners and heads of households was repackaged by the Reagan campaign into a form of welfare queens, right? But the war on poverty quickly morphed into a war on crime when policies that had been designed to stamp out Black liberation movements and the perceived threat that urban rebellions posed to property and the state confined disproportionate numbers of Black men in jails and prisons. In the mounting days of the crack cocaine epidemic, a new way of talking about Black communities as super predators emerged among white politicians and policymakers, and Black males mostly became the face of the super predator, right? Selective hearing on the part of Black male elites in media, civic leadership, and politics, however, insisted that what was most urgent for a race in peril was to improve the conditions of the male half of it, and the crisis of the Black male dawned. The rhetoric of Black male crisis could have been framed as one of the gendered outcomes of the state's race and class warfare against Black political movements and the Black urban poor. Could have been one of them. But its framers' insistence that Black men were under siege and falling behind everyone else, including Black women, swiftly captured the public imagination. The crisis was readily absorbed into Black cultural ideologies and changed the ways African Americans thought about an entire generation of Black males. The panic outlook in that popular discourse is perfectly exemplified in a 1983 special issue of Ebony magazine. In the heyday of print glossies, Black-owned and operated Ebony reigned as the equivalent of Time or Life magazine among African Americans. With its patchwork spreads highlighting news, business, entertainment, culture, politics, and Black intellectual thought, Ebony both reflected and set Black America's agenda. A special introduction letter from the editor-in-chief, the lay historian and Black publishing icon Lerone Bennett Jr., read as follows. I will just, for the sake of time, read a small quote. He argues that Black men are, quote, losing ground to white men, white women, and Black women in offices and colleges. The Black male-female ratio at some colleges is 3, 4, and 5 to 1. Black males, moreover, have a higher cancer rate, a lower life expectancy, and a higher adjusted death rate than any other sex or racial group. And this is important because Paul Butler, remember, in talking about Black male exceptionalism, points us to the way that we can articulate the crisis in ways that often distort statistics. So at this time, we're talking about a huge rise in Black women's college attendance. That's framed as a deficit of Black men instead of a surge in Black college enrollment, right? So Bennett is, and I can't make this up, folks, a famed Morehouse graduate. In fact, throughout his life, he used his status in the publishing world to promote the college and its administrators as standard bearers for Black men who embodied what he often felt was a dying breed of scholar gentlemen. But I want to take us a look at this chosen image, right? Because I think it actually encapsulates what I'm talking about. This crisis of the Black poor, which is very, very real, is not selected with the crisis of Black poor people, right? It is reframed. Remember, this is a time when we're talking about, Black men can't get a cab in New York, right? This image reframes it as Black professional men being the victims of this crisis, right? We could have talked about the crisis as affecting Black men and women and the poor, but it got usurped basically as, Black college-bound men are the victims of it, Black male professionals are the victims of it, right? What could have been, all respectability politics are done in response to how marginalized people attempt to control the way they are seen. But with these large-scale projects like the social panic around Black male crisis, we see a type of respectability politics that exemplifies what I would call reactive respectability, and that it's a response to a perceived racial crisis that's organized into institutions and social movements and campaigns. It's beyond the individual's choice and how they present themselves. It's a concerted, organized effort that's institutionalized, right? Morehouse is just such a site where black male elites institutionalized a reaction to black male crisis. But this book finds that black male elites don't simply set racial agendas, but they can also distort them. Black male elites usurped the issue of the crisis in which deindustrialization and an unleashed war on drugs overwhelmingly devastated low-income black men and women, and took full advantage of the veil to redirect the race's attention to an agenda that prioritized themselves. In this claim, the race was being brought asunder because black male achievement was being brought asunder, and thus distributing our attention and resources to high-achieving black men would save the race. So let's talk about how I organized the book in terms of my actual chapters. Institutions tell us what they want us to know about themselves. They also tell us what they don't want us to know about themselves by how they respond to headlines and news about themselves. So I'm not sure any recent news you all have heard on Morehouse. There's been plenty of recent news. New York Times ran a large feature on Spelman and Morehouse being embroiled in sexual assault. They were under investigation by Title IX. It was basically a Me Too on college campuses feature. This is the New York Times feature. BuzzFeed did a huge expose about campus sexual assault allegations at Morehouse that revealed such a systemic failing around handling these allegations that it really started resembling Catholic Church levels in terms of there seemed to be an effort to make sure that victims, one, were sort of, discouraged from ruining the life of a good black man, right? That Spelman and Morehouse staffers were complicit in discouraging victims from coming forward, and that the Morehouse administration also just grossly mishandled allegations. So in my book, I've tried to organize my chapters as sort of the origin stories of headlines. I interviewed men who were all enrolled at this height of black male crisis. So I chose dates between Clinton's crime bill in 94 and Obama's election in 2008. And that was really important for me for that scope. But in doing this project, the headlines just kept coming, and they kept coming. And it became empirically irresponsible to keep ignoring things just because they were past the date of the men I interviewed. And what I realized was the men I was talking to were the origin stories of problems that were culminating in the headlines currently. And that all of those problems that Morehouse was having in the present day could really be told in this 20-year backlog, basically, of what they didn't deal with in the height of crisis, of black male crisis, right? So, excuse me. I've lost the slide here, I'm sorry. For one of my chapters, I have dealt with, you've heard Morehouse's trans policy. So the transgender policy, Spelman enacted a transgender policy that said, look, we, admit women, we graduate anybody. That's what Smith has, that's typical of women's colleges at this point. Morehouse was then under pressure to have its own trans policy because Spelman is next door. And Morehouse had a policy that really got a lot of international coverage and acclaim because it was like, oh, look, a men's college is now admitting trans students. But if you peeled back the surface of it, it was really an underhanded policy, and this is why. It admitted trans men, people who identified as men, who, to be clear, have never applied to Morehouse College. Morehouse has never had a trans male applicant. 99.100% of its trans students are trans women who are currently students. The policy allowed for the expulsion of trans women, except if you could petition the president, who would assemble a board of his choosing to therefore dictate if you deserve to graduate or not. So I argue that this was clear proof that we organized a sort of curriculum around around Black manhood in the setting in which you can fail masculinity, right? That gender is not the secondary curriculum. It's really the primary curriculum if you can fail it. The second chapter I looked at was really using the DuBoisian lens on double consciousness to talk about sexual assault. College men are organized to really see their masculinity through the eyes of other men in ways that they probably wouldn't outside of college. We sort of falsely organize the bro culture in colleges and universities. But when you racialize that component, it really compounds it with this idea of rape allegations racialize Black men for Black men, but they don't see Black women as racialized in that. What I mean is they see an injustice and a victimization in bringing a Black man down. And they would say, well, the system is racist, right? But if the system is racist, then the system is also racist against Black women victims. It de-racializes Black women, but it racializes Black men. But the chapter I want to talk about today, and we'll, if we have some time for it, I don't want to hold you all between me and food. But I want to talk a bit about today is what Morehouse does around this issue that's called social justice capitalism. Morehouse as a culture is a very corporate heavy, very, this idea of sort of a form of capitalism that benefits the race and that's anti-racist. So I want to play this clip. Sorry, I'm not getting audio. It's not that important if we need to skip it. I will talk you through it. Robert Smith, who before before May 19th of 2018, was fairly obscure to a lot of sort of household names in Black communities. Smith is the wealthiest African American. He's worth $5 billion. And he's Morehouse's commencement speaker this year, and he very, very famously surprises them all by like going full Oprah style and being like, I'm paying off everybody's loans, right? Mothers fall out in the aisles. It is right? It is kingdom, it's hallelujah for everyone. But here's what's very interesting about, that act of altruism is that Smith really embodies probably the perfect idea that Morehouse espouses about racial leadership. Before this point, we didn't know anything about him in terms of politically what he was involved in. He'd never held any really formal sort of Black leadership positions, but wealth was the claim Morehouse made to his Black male racial leadership. And so social justice capitalism is this idea that what Black people need is more capitalism, right? Where Fred Hampton would tell us, the answer to capitalism is not Black capitalism. This is the opposite, which is like, no, Black capitalism is exactly the answer. And because of that, Morehouse has this really overwhelming presence of corporate sponsors. It sort of overly prepares men for corporate sector jobs. About 1/3 of the students are business majors, and this is a liberal arts college, right? So the men I spoke to, they were represented a number of majors and a number of career choices. And they would tell me that, Morehouse, addresses you in the business suit and it sets you up for that field, but it also leaves you naked if you go into any other fields, right? If you're going into education, if you're going into anything that the college doesn't feel is really squarely within its lens and its frameworks of Black male success. So I wanted to, now we got audio. So I wanted to talk about how leadership and that social justice capitalism component is sort of institutionalized in Morehouse. This is a quote from one of my respondents who said, we are the talented 10th. We're claiming this. We're going to instill in our children like a noblesse oblige, right? We take care of our people, not just live off the fact and be like, I'm smarter than everybody, but live off the much was given to you, so we expect a lot. You have to hold up the race. And Roy says, leadership is making an impact on the immediate community. That can be their pubs, that can be the Democratic Party. It could be black people or white people. You should be able to stand out in your community and be able to make changes in their best interest. So these are really interesting to me because, one, we see a framing of the talented 10th, which is actually a distortion of what DuBois meant. DuBois, if we can interpret him correctly, meant that there was an obligation of literate black people. That's what he meant by talented. You know, and then eugenics of the day used that phrase a lot. Literate black people had an obligation to pull up the race. But with social justice capitalism, we see a distortion of that to the idea that what is good for the race is good for individually exceptional black men. And that because black men have the most potential to be wealthy, channeling our resources towards black men is actually anti-racist. That's actually racial advancement itself. With Roy, what's very interesting is arguing that, that leadership can be, it can be the Republicans or the Democrats. There is a way of talking about leadership as though it were empty of any real political component, but that it's a virtue for the sake of being a virtue, right? That when you masculinize leadership, that black men who are just self-appointed leaders don't sort of need anything to stand on beyond that. The Leadership Center here you see is one of 3 that Morehouse has on campus, but I want to talk about this within the frames of 2 programs. One, in that effort to corporatize Morehouse, there's a program called Leadership and Professional Development, which is for business majors. This is mandatory, and it is what you all are doing here would be the curriculum: how to butter bread, which shrimp fork to use, how to pour wine. This is the idea of preparing men. It's a purely etiquette class that has no academic component. It's about preparing men for the white corporate sphere. And what I found really interesting about this was it's sort of this idea of realness, that the idea that if you can just pass with white people, that you can that you can sort of fake it until you make it. It's all about the cultural interactions. And yet it's a very outmoded and outdated way of thinking about whiteness. We know from Seamus Khan and others who have studied, white elites, particularly in boarding schools, they're listening to Biggie in their dining halls. The men of Morehouse were learning how to do small talk about Beethoven. I mean this literally. They were learning how to do small talk about Beethoven and Bach, while white elites were preparing for this idea that elitism is democratized, and their preparation was about being able to basically interact with the lower classes, right? Being basically culturally amphibious and being able to interact with classes. And Morehouse had this sort of outdated, almost Scrooge McDuck idea of white elites. And I thought that's very interesting because the veil doesn't just distort black life. There's also a way in which it distorts an idea of what white people expect from you in the way that they're doing the veil, right? I want to wrap up because I know we are all good. I want to make the point finally about neoliberalism, and my colleague Frieden here has written extensively about it. We talk about black masculinity, neoliberal aims all the time. My Brother's Keeper is a really good example of how a project like Morehouse actually has really nationally large implications. So Obama actually speaks at Morehouse months before he launches My Brother's Keeper. And in his commencement speech at Morehouse, he strangely lauds the graduates, but also admonishes them. He's basically like, look, you all have a cleanup job to do for all the other young black men who look like you. No one wants to hear your excuses. It's a really neoliberal rhetoric of, personal responsibility and your bootstraps, etc. And then they go and launch My Brother's Keeper. Few people know that MBK was not birthed in the DOE, in the Department of Education. Anyone know which agency? It was the DOJ. It was Eric Holder's plan to improve community policing. by basically putting the burden on black boys to be policed better. All right? That idea is very salient in how we've approached black male success. It brings to the table very strange bedfellows who otherwise, particularly conservative interests, who have no interest in any other type of black student success, come to the table around black male success. Because of this idea that, as Frieden says, black boys need grit, right? This idea that, the pound cake speech really works on them, right? The pulling up the pants. Morehouse has these, this is the business office. Morehouse has these blazers that we give to students, and this is actually not Morehouse, that's Urban Prep Academy. So you have a college that's very invested in basically being more of an academy than we would think of as a liberal arts college. But to bring it back to the Cooperian lens, right, to what Cooper would say on this, neoliberalism has thrived in our efforts around black male success mostly because they've been usurped by black elites. When we look at social movements where black women were in the fold, particularly working class black women, they pulled those movements left. We look at the Nation of Islam, we look at black Marxists, we look at black communists. All of those movements had women that pulled them radically left. In the absence of women, what happens with spaces like Morehouse is that black male elites are deciding the fate of the race, not at the table with black women, but at the table with white men. And that there is a keen interest, a very paternalizing interest that whites have in basically producing black men like this, right? I want to end by saying that, Cooper and DuBois, when we think about the DuBois that we admit to the canon, it's not just a matter of what it does for us intellectually or even for us in terms of our thoughts about DuBois, but that these are men who are actually taking their stripes and ideas about masculinity, particularly about black male elitism, from DuBois. And therefore, if we deploy DuBois to masculinist aims, it justifies their deployment of DuBois to masculinist aims as well. If we take DuBois as someone who is willing to constantly be worked on by black feminism, then it sets them up to think of that as well, that black women have a seat at the table of black racial advancement and aren't just the recipients of it once black men have accomplished it. I went back to Morehouse to actually speak at a class last year, and I was very, very struck by, the students, they were just, they were just eager and warm, and I thought they were also really, really engaged with ideas that would be alien to the men I went to school with. They were much more progressive. I think because Spelman has become much more feminist, they are much more knowledgeable in response. They were talking about masculinity. They were talking about sexual assault. They wanted to know how to not be one of those guys who was doing that to women. And I thought, wow, this is so remarkable because the students are actually progressing forward. And then when I walked outside, the campus was sort of stuck in time. And it was still perpetuating this cultural curriculum around dressing up the man versus having any sort of real preventative programs around sexual assault, which it still doesn't have. It still doesn't have LGBTQ counseling, et cetera. But it still presents these, it actually revived this from 2010, this campaign around sort of, what the Morehouse man reads and how he dresses and how he speaks, et cetera. I want to leave you all with that because I know we have more to do this evening, but thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Yes. So what is the significance then of your contribution? That is, you knew what you were going to represent, and so you did so willingly.
You want to hear the story?
Yes.
When I was a junior, I was a sociology and women's studies major, and we were taking qualitative methods and learning ethnography, how to embed ourselves. And we had to pick a project, and my classmates, it was spring, and spring is when they interview all the pageants at black colleges, right? All the women try out for pageants. There are pageants for men too. And all my classmates said, Saida, that should be your project. You should go embed at Morehouse and basically, do the interview to be Miss Runa White. And I thought, great, because they'll never take me. I'm a feminist malcontent. They already know that. And I went to that interview, and they called me back, and they said, you're in the pageant, which I was horrified because I knew it was going to cost me so much money. But that is how that happened. And, my classmates still joke about that. Beverly Guy-Sheftall, who was my mentor at Spelman, she, still to this day, she says, when I heard, I said, which Saida? Not Saida Grundy would be in a pageant, but there's a very interesting history around black college pageants as being, the way they do femininity is in some ways really interesting and really unconventional. Morehouse is probably different in that it's a men's college picking a woman, right? She's not a student of Morehouse. I was the only black college queen who was not a member of her own student body. And I had to fight for things like getting a vote on student government. But there is a great deal of reverence for that position, believe it or not. I still to this day get guys who were freshmen when I was queen and say, you were my queen. There have been some amazing women who have been Miss Morehouse College. I will say that. There have been some amazing women. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. If I heard you correctly, earlier in your presentation, you indicated that Morehouse, some years ago, it was almost at the level of the Catholic Church in terms of abuses.
Right, around the sexual assault allegations. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Now, if I heard you also correctly, you said you went back recently and you spoke to a class, and their focus was on, we don't want to be one of those guys.
Right.
So it seems to be a shift, but then you walked out on campus and you got a different feeling. So the question is, what is the context today on the campus? Yeah. And then at a larger scale, where do you see our overall culture regarding this?
Absolutely. So I would say today on the campus is really, like many institutions, there's a sort of a break between the membership and what the administration thinks of their membership, right? So Morehouse has, traditionally, their administration has been fairly conservative leaning, but also there's been huge unrest in their board of trustees. There was actually a huge piece that came out in The Root about even for a school that has 3,000 members, the board of trustees is like 40 members, which is way too large. And then something like 2/3 of them are Morehouse alumni. So that's what I mean by how this sort of Catholic Church effect can happen, in which you get a lot of cronyism from the top, right? The current president, he came from Harvard Business School. He replaced John Wilson, who went back to Harvard to advise their president's office. The current president, he's revived these, right? So these have been revived, and that was from 10 years ago. So I think there still is this rhetoric around sort of the most important curriculum for black men is cultural curriculum, which, I think really sells black men short. It's like an intellectual curriculum is the most important curriculum that any black men should be receiving from college. And Benjamin Mays very much thought the same thing. But there's a way in which they've sort of only taken one part of Benjamin Mays as well, right? That they liked the gentleman, but the scholar part was, all right? But here's the thing about Morehouse. It still produces, in terms of its top performing students, it still produces outstanding top performing students. Who's really suffering are students who are probably the most on the margins, right? It has an attrition rate of 40%. 40%, right? So instead of saying this is a problem, part of the way they respond to that is with this cultural curriculum by saying, well, it makes you a man to get through Morehouse, right? They've rationalized masculinity around what any other college might consider a glaring problem. Basically, this is a gauntlet, and that, real Morehouse men will get through. And also, there are men who don't deserve to be here, right? The riffraff, I called them in the book. Trans students don't deserve to be there. Queer students don't deserve to be there. Students who they just saw as, having disciplinary issues don't deserve to be there. There are schools who say everyone we admit we have a requirement to graduate. Morehouse's culture has, I think, because black colleges really are suffering from the '08 crash, which we've not really caught up. So black wealth has been depleted in a way that you can really see that impact black enrollment. And Morehouse had it had declining graduation rates even before the before the crash. But again, the response to that has been to deplore this cultural, rhetoric around manhood. And I talk about in the book, one of the reasons I think they do that is because, places like UMass, like BU, all the decisions we make around students are about ranking, right? There's a cult of ranking. Everything from are we gonna renovate a dorm? Are we gonna, make 4-credit system versus 3? That's all about this fealty towards ranking. And ranking has left out black colleges to a point where black colleges don't actually care about ranking. So they've basically supplanted the prestige that ranking doesn't give them with a cultural rhetoric.
Hi, I'm JT.
Hi, JT.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. So your work on Morehouse had me thinking a lot about black male initiatives on lots of other campuses. Yes. So I'm thinking of Derek Broom's work.
I was just about to say Derek, yes.
And then I'm at the University of Mississippi. We have them there. We have,
yes.
I think it's called Men of Excellence. And what I'm wondering is to what extent there's a relationship between what happens at Morehouse and what seems to be happening at a lot of PWIs as well.
Right.
And I think initially one might think that it's what's taking place at Morehouse that might be influencing what's happening at the PWIs, but I'm wondering if there's a way to think about it the other way too.
Oh, absolutely. So in that latter part, absolutely, because, we talked about that pool of black male seniors really declining, particularly high-achieving black male seniors, and they can go anywhere. And so Morehouse is faced with this dilemma of well, how do we continue to sell black boys on something that has kind of backfired on them? You might have guessed that black male 18-year-olds don't want to go somewhere with visitation policies and a whole bunch of rules. And in fact, there was one of the responses in my studies that, they call us men, but they treat us like boys. This idea of this paradoxical anxiety around black male deviance, they'll act up if you let them get out of hand, but then we're also creating men. So they're actually really, really vying for that pool of talented, high school seniors in a way that they might have lost some of their shine for this new crop of young students who find communities of black men on many campuses. And I think Black Male Initiatives actually have contributed to that, this idea that, at the University of Mississippi, there will also be something that is, for us, by us, basically, right? There will also be these initiatives around black male brotherhood. What Derek Brooms does so well, though, Black Male Initiatives are really, they're deployed by higher ed, and they're very specific around wanting to increase outcomes on the educational front. And the cultural programming to them is to supplant the educational outcomes. They want to raise, achievement and GPAs, et cetera, for black males. And I think at Morehouse, the culture it's more about the brand of the college itself. That, I think the administration, there are those within the administration that have concerns, academically, but I think that basically the fuel that drives their stuff is not really about the achievement, because they will always have high achieving black males. They have had 4 Rhodes Scholars. They'll always have them.
Thank you for your very impressive scholarship here.
Oh, thank you.
I know you had mentioned Anna Julia Cooper in the beginning and how she informed Du Bois. Do you see her as representing or expressing or espousing the progressive side concerning racialization, as you mentioned?
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, Anna Julia Cooper, who herself was very much an upper middle class black woman, you know, comes from a highly educated family, her interest really was in, you know, black women domestics, the black poor. It was really not this, it was not a shared belief that simply the most educated, you know, of the black bourgeoisie were responsible for shouldering the race. She really did believe that this effort to basically change the lives of, you know, what she called the stream, right, the source of the stream, that would be the effort that was most efficacious in racial advancement. And that was very progressive for the time, right? And she's doing, and even though Booker T is talking about working class black people, Booker T is doing that in mind with black inferiority. And Booker T is saying the problem is that you haven't accepted your station. I thank you, Alden Morris, for exposing Booker T. You know, that the real sort of satisfaction comes in accepting your station, and that these intellectual pursuits are fruitless, right? Anna Julia Cooper's not arguing that at all. She's actually arguing what some would say is like, you know, it's like proto-Marxist in a way about black advancement, that it's black women who are the poorest who we should be focusing on in terms of racial advancement.
Give one more round of applause for Dr. Grundy. And I think it's of note. I think it's of note that these are hard conversations to have. We all don't agree, but what's beautiful about it, especially because as also a graduate of a historically black college, you understand that many of us learned about racialization once we stepped on these campuses in a way that is undescribable. And so to talk about these is exactly, it's Du Boisian in the way in which we can interrogate it, we can disagree about it, but it begins and continues a conversation that is important for all of us. So I just want to say that because I did not go to Spelman or I married a Morehouse man, but the truth is that I've never experienced Atlanta in that way, and Atlanta is a very different and special black place. So I just want to say that these are difficult conversations. So that's why you're here, and that's why for me this is something that causes ripples, right? Like, oh, what? I don't agree. That's what we want to do, because that's what Du Bois did. Because if it ain't propaganda, it's not going to make you think. So let's get ready for dinner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.